Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career. Today on Do Good Work, we have Lisa Genovese. Lisa is president of BottomLine, her company that supports challenger brands to evolve their business and create more impact. For her, advancing a business requires more than a surface level strategy. That is why Lisa and her team focus on their unique impact assessment process to uncover key insights and help their clients see what others may not. Her team helps their clients implement high-performing strategies centered on strong market research insights that consistently improve conversion rates, increase sales, and profit margins. And Lisa is on a mission to help brands level up and to have an impact on the world around them. Lisa, thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Lisa, there's a lot of things that we can talk about today and a lot of different directions when it comes to working with challenger brands, the quote unquote challenges they face, as well as like what you do when it comes to doing the market research, to which, you know, when we say market research, it might seem very bland, very general, very, okay, cool, do some research, maybe Google searching. But I know that you have something very specific when it comes to your impact assessment. And I love the terminology, but I think we should start there. Like why do brands need to have an impact assessment, and what are some of the steps that brands can take in order to assess, and why impact?
Awesome. I would be happy to answer that. The value of an impact assessment really comes in that holistic look at the whole business. And I find, to your point about doing research and just Googling, yeah, that you can get some good information there, but there's really no substitute for proper market research. So things like interviews or focus groups and really hearing it from the horse's mouth. I do find that I will come across businesses where they've gotten to this like fork in the road where they have to make a decision. They can either continue to do it the same old way and probably get the same results, or go, okay, we really want to make a change. And that's great, but I firmly believe that in order to make that change, you have got to do some proper research to inform your decision-making process. Otherwise, you're really just kind of chucking spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks, which I don't know about you, but that's not very fun.
Yeah, especially when the spaghetti is not cooked enough and it doesn't stick on the wall.
That's right.
No, but you do make a good point. And I mean, I love marketing. I love positioning. I love branding. And I want to dive into more of like, what does it actually mean to position yourself correctly? And what does your brand actually entail?
Good one. So what does it mean to properly position yourself? Well, I like to look at it as if you haven't properly positioned yourself, you're probably getting nickeled and dimed to death. And so you're swimming in what I call the sea of sameness. You're doing and saying the same things as your competitors, and there's really no differentiation. Where positioning comes in is if you can skate your brand out into the white space. Gotta love hockey analogies in Canada here, but if you can get yourself set apart where you're doing and saying something so completely different that you've now become an exclusivity versus a commodity. People are willing to pay more for that. And that's really what positioning is differentiating yourself, setting yourself apart, putting that flag in the sand and saying, this is who we are and what we stand for. But what's really important about that is you have to have done your research to understand what does the customer actually need and want. Because if you've not taken that into account and put this flag in the sand and said, oh, here's what we stand for, but your customers don't care about that, well, you're going to miss the mark again. So, really good market research looks at the whole picture, not just, just the messaging or just the competitors or just the customers. It's got to be all of the things combined that give you that positioning.
You hit it on the head, and it was very specific. And I know these are very basics, but I think when you master the basics, you can really start stepping and leveling up. But not creating what you think is cool, what you want, what your team wants, but what your market wants. And that's how you can create the difference that is worth making, that people are worth paying for. Now, when it comes to pricing, I know we can go in a lot of different routes when it comes to pricing, but I'd like to talk about the inverse relationship between trust, pricing, and high pricing and not becoming a commodity. When you're looking at this market research, of course, it's different between B2B, B2C, but how have you been able to kind of navigate brands through the pricing matrix and being able to, like, hey, we're finding positioning, here's a price that we're going to stick with. How have you kind of like navigated that? Because your pricing, it's really hard to change once you put it out there and people know it.
Absolutely. And such a good question. I actually recently did a piece on our kind of philosophy around pricing strategy for my role at GuidePoint. And we're working right now on an infographic to kind of summarize some of this information. So very timely question. But I feel like people often just pick a price out of the sky back to what they kind of think sounds good. And again, you're leaving so much money on the table if you've not done your homework to really understand what the market needs and wants. So kind of high level summary, start with competitive research, understand, what is the competitor's UVP, their unique value proposition? How are they priced? And then how is your product or service superior or different? I personally like to see that information in a basic old spreadsheet where I can see a matrix of just where are the discrepancies, so it becomes really easy at first glance. But I also like to see customer needs and kind of the weight of those customer needs against the competitor's UVP. So that we're making sure that that new product or service actually aligns with the customer's pain points and the competing products that are out there. Then the second step, let's create a hypothesis based on what we feel the price should be, obviously based on that further research that we just did. And a couple rules of thumb with that to keep in mind. Typically, and just on the psychology side of things, customers won't notice a 10% increase. That's usually a very kind of play it safe bet. When we start going over that is when people are going to notice. 20% is very noticeable, 30% is a big jump. And you've got to be able to really justify if you're going to make a 30% price jump. But, in some cases where we're dealing with something that's really remarkable or really valuable, where the positioning has done a really good job of creating that exclusivity, sometimes you can. I mean, a great example of that's the Dyson Airwrap Styler. I never in my life thought I would spend $700 on a blow dryer, but it's been absolutely revolutionary, life-changing for me. And I would pay it again and again if it ever broke. So back to some of the steps. So then we got to validate that hypothesis. I like to do that typically with some sort of primary, whether that be interviews or focus groups where possible. Then we set the price. We test it with a small sample size, and then we have to adjust the price before we go way out into the market if there's been some price pushback. So those are kind of like high level steps that we would take to go into a pricing strategy. So it's not just to pick a number out of the sky or look at the competitors once and go, oh, well, they charge $50, we should charge 52. It's really not that simple.
And I want to go back to, and I do want to dive more into like, hey, let's look at some strategic scenarios so that we can kind of like do a thought experiment around this. But I love how you mentioned the positioning piece. And I kind of want to dive a little deeper into that because I want to be able to explain like the emotional behaviors that we have and exhibit when we're actually buying a product, and how, like, for example, your Dyson blow dryer, a $700 blow dryer, is able to position itself in such exclusivity to demand that price point. Because I know that there is like the trust factor. If we see something that's cheap, we expect it to not be as efficient. But when we see something, it could be same quality, and again, efficacy plays a key role in here, making sure you deliver the goods. But if we see that same price point, let's say $100, $200, $300 more expensive, you're attracting a different segment in the marketplace who values that and says, hey, you know what? I'm not going to buy the cheapest. I'm going to buy the best. And we tend to trust things that are more expensive simply because they're more expensive. There has to be something here around it. When it comes to that, that's a consumer behavior. And I don't know if we have enough time in this podcast to talk about consumer behaviors, but I do want to understand from your point of view, positioning products or services to be able to demand that level of exclusivity, that white glove, that concierge, that top tier pricing, because I know a lot of brands would like to be able to get there if that's their marketing play. So how can we position ourselves for that stance?
Good question. And I just when it comes to pricing, I always use the lobster analogy. I'm sure everybody listening to this has heard it. If you pull over to the side of the road, there's two buckets. One says lobster's $10, the other one says lobster's $25. And somebody walks up and asks the guy, hey, what's wrong with the $10 lobsters? That's positioning right there. They think there's automatically something wrong with it. But really, my answer to this question comes back to understanding the end customer again. So, if your end customer is somebody that's after the cheapest of the cheap, that's okay, but you have to know that. And then that is how you position your product. If you want to become that, Dyson Airwrap styler, where you are, that exclusivity that people are willing to pay more for, it really comes back to the simple principles of how are you remarkable? What value do you create? What's your greater purpose? How are you creating an immersive experience? What emotional quality have you created? I mean, there's a number of different things, and I could go off about those 5 or 6 principles because that's a core piece that we use at BottomLine to help define a brand. But
well, let's do that, because I think that's important, because it's all about the emotional state that we want to transfer to our customers. And how do you do that with your branding?
For sure. And brand attachment's the other one that I didn't touch on, but yeah, I'm happy to chat about those things. And to take a quick step back, because it'll give some more context. Those 5 principles, a few years ago, we spent probably almost a year doing a study on answering the question, what separates the wheat from the chaff? What makes the big guys the big guys? What makes the small guys the small guys? And what kind of holds them back from becoming the big guys? And it was really those 5 things that I just listed off. And what's interesting about those 5 things is that it has nothing to do with time. It has nothing to do with budget. It has everything to do with how you are positioned. And if you can't create, like when we talk about pricing and which out of those 5 things is the most important, I always argue it's value. As humans, we're a little bit shallow, and there's only a couple of things that we really care about, even though we don't like to admit it.
We're pretty in deep, but our emotions can be kind of shallow, right?
Well, it's true. Like we really only care, how are you going to make my life easier or better? How are you going to save me time or money? Those are really the core fundamental things. So if you are not creating value in one of those ways, it's going to be really difficult to create any sort of positioning that end consumer is willing to pay more for. So I'll go back to my Dyson Airwrap styler as an example. The price to me was appalling. Like I couldn't even believe it. But when I was able to see that, and spoiler alert, I have lots of hair. It used to take me almost, an hour and a half to blow dry my hair after I showered in the morning. It was ridiculous. Whereas with that thing, I can dry my hair in 15 minutes. And so that is a significant amount of time that you're saving. You're also making my life better because I can spend, that other hour and 15 minutes with my family or sleeping or whatever it is that, I would want to do with my life.
You value your time.
I value my time, but Dyson has done a really good job at understanding their end customer and what they find value in a product and then positioning it in that way. Whereas if Dyson had just slapped a $700 price tag and said, oh, buy this because it's cool.
Because we're Dyson.
Because we're Dyson, that end customer would really not have given it a second look, I don't think.
Interesting. And then so taking that positioning of like, okay, makes it easier or faster for me, saves time or saves money, elevates my status, or it makes me feel better about myself. How does that play into the 5 dynamics that you work with at BottomLine?
So great question. Those things that you just outlined really are how we define value.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the one of those five.
Okay.
Then you've got, greater purpose, which is just as it sounds, why are you getting out of bed every morning? People think when I say greater purpose, I'm talking about giving back to charity, and that can be a component of it, but it is really more the why you do what you do
Yeah,
every
why are
day.
you in business? Why do you exist?
Exactly. And we know that purpose-based brands always outperform ones that don't have a defined purpose.
That's a bold
When we,
sentence, and I want to restate that. I'm sorry to pause you, but
please.
if you have purpose and you're driven with that purpose, your company runs with the DNA of that purpose, your customers are experiencing that purpose, your clients are giving that experience in every single interaction. Lisa just said it, you're going to win.
It's true though. That's my take on it anyways.
No,
So
and I love that you said that, because that's something that I love to focus on, with my work, with what I'm trying to do, is making sure that we embed that into your DNA, because that does make a difference in the
yes.
marketplace, in the experience, in your experience, the team's experience, and so on. But I come back to our conversation here.
Well, good. Well, I have one other point about that is today's consumer is a lot smarter than people give them credit. They really, I think, a lot of brands have gotten into this. Do it as we've always done. Let's slap lipstick on a pig. It'll be fine.
Mhm.
But the reality is today's consumer is too smart. If you do not have a good product and do not have strong positioning, they're just not going to buy from you. It's really that simple.
Mhm.
And if that trust isn't there, you're going to get left in the dust. And that purpose really helps build that trust, because people will now align with what you stand for, and that becomes a driving force for your growth. So I could go off on just purpose, but I'll carry through the rest of my list of,
No, of course.
remarkability. That one is just what sets you apart. What makes you very different? Is there something remarkable about your product or service? And a good example of this, because I'll often get asked, well, we sell widgets and our widgets are the same as everyone else. Zappos, they sell shoes just like any other online retailer, but it's their customer service that
That makes
makes them
them.
so remarkable. So it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily have to be what's remarkable about the products you sell. It can be the experience that the customer gets instead. So
Oh,
good kind of
that's a really
differentiator.
interesting piece. And to add on that, the question is, what are they going to tell their friends or their
Yeah.
family? Like, I know that, I wrote a piece about the Wise Labs, the company that sells $20 security cameras. And for
Mhm.
positioning, it's like, well, it's super cheap. Yeah, it's extremely cheap. It's like $100 less than the competitors, or like half of the price, whatever. But their customer experience is beyond the top, and the way that they treat the customers, I think, is definitely something to talk about. Even to the fact that they had to, listening to a podcast around them, that, and I'm not sponsoring, I just really love the product, like you can tell, but kind of like your Dyson. But the fact that they were back ordered for, like, I don't know, 100,000 orders, and they have to delay the shipment, no one refunded, they all waited.
Wow, that says something.
That says
That really
something
says
about how
something.
you treat your customers. So that's a key component. Your product has to deliver the goods, but if you can make something else around the customer service remarkable, around the customer experience remarkable, around something that the delivery of that product, it can be the product itself. You could be the one and only X widget in the world, or in the next AI or virtual reality. But again, that's a key component. What are your customers, your clients going to tell their friends and family?
Absolutely, for sure. And that dovetails nicely into my next one, which is brand attachment. So most marketers track brand loyalty. But what's interesting about loyalty is it does not correlate to sales and revenue. Brand attachment,
Huh.
however, does. So when brand attachment goes up on a graph, so does sales and rev. And when it falls, so does sales and revenue.
So what is
Um,
loyalty versus attachment?
So brand attachment, a good example of this I often talk about is toothpaste. So if you're loyal to a brand, you just buy the same, and we'll use toothpaste. If you've always bought Crest, you're probably just going to always buy Crest because that's an easy go-to. It works, but you don't really have any emotional attachment to that brand. It's just toothpaste.
Yeah,
And then
whatever Costco's selling one week, it could be Crest, it could be another brand the next week, and I just buy
yeah,
whatever I need.
that's right. Whereas brand attachment, you have created affection, connection, and passion for that brand. And you
Mm.
now actually are going to tell your friends and family about it. So you're going to spread word of mouth marketing.
Mm.
And that is why, with that correlation to sales and revenue, that's why that happens. So when people then say, okay, well, how do I create brand attachment? So when we say affection, connection, and passion, those are things like shared and common experiences, shared beliefs, feeling, that sense of belonging. This brand really gets me. They understand me. They're the brands that you can see yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
And so back to the toothpaste example, where I say, well, I actually am very attached to my toothpaste brand. People think, okay. And so let me explain. I had some health issues a couple of years ago. And one of the things that I had to do was I had to cut out all chemicals in every product I use. So I had to change my shampoo, my skincare, my toothpaste, like you name it. And so I started using Tom's toothpaste that's fluoride free and, SLS free, etc. But what was interesting is through that process, as I got to know more about the brand, I started to learn about, why some of these other brands that I've been using were actually harmful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And now I almost make it a mission without even realize I do it. I talk about my toothpaste and I say like, hey, you shouldn't buy Crest, you should buy Tom's because it's not going to poison your kids. And it sounds like such a silly thing, but I'm sure by me talking about it to my friends and my family and my colleagues, that's giving them a brand lift that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
And
so
that's
that
part
brand
of measure too,
Yeah. So brand attachment's a big one. And then the other one is immersive experience. And this is, I will say, out of all of them, the most difficult thing to do with a brand. Immersive experience, they're the brands that have really intertwined their way into your everyday life. They're the brands that you couldn't imagine living without. So if you get a Starbucks coffee on your way to work every single morning, that is kind of ingrained in your day-to-day
your
routine.
habit. It's now in my calendar, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of creating a new habit or breaking a habit in that customer's life or their journey, and ingraining your brand as part of that trigger. And so a good example of this, Kit Kat actually years ago, and I'm going to date myself here for a second, but everybody today knows it as take a break or I need a break. But where that started was Kit Kat and a coffee, and so they paired their product with the act of having a coffee break, because back then it was, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and everybody took a 15-minute coffee break twice a day. And that campaign gave them a tremendous lift.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really evolved over the years to now what we know as take a break. But it was pairing with the act of having a coffee. So the trigger was pouring a coffee, and people would, in their brain, think, oh, I should have a Kit Kat on my coffee break. So
you said a key word there. Yeah, triggers, right?
Triggers.
So that's pretty interesting. And I want to take one step back. And I know we're going back and forth here, crew, but I think it's important to really dissect this. But you mentioned earlier when it comes to having affinity or affection with your brand and an attachment. If you're doing a personal brand, I do know that that's sharing your values so that people attach to you, and that can be scary. And I understand that, but I think that's like we're laying out the science of it, the framework of it here. Yeah. So I really love, Lisa, you being able to talk about that. And then the habit forming, that can seem difficult, but I love a great book. It's called Habits. I think The Power of Habit. But they talk about that. What's the trigger? What's the cue? And then the response, and like being able to walk through those things. Like, okay, what are my customers' triggers, clients' triggers? How can I position something so that they can understand and be aware of that trigger? And where do I play a role in that?
Absolutely. It's almost, when you're doing, back to that market research side, it's really, when you're doing interviews, asking, what are the things you're struggling with? What are you most frustrated about? And if you can, take one of those major pain points and insert your product or service to solve that pain point, it makes it so much easier to then pair with that habit of, I don't know if they hate taking the garbage out, if there's a way that they wouldn't have to take the garbage out. Maybe you build robots to take garbage out. But
hopefully one day my vacuum can do that, as it vacuums everything, which it does now, but take out the garbage too, but we'll see.
I would love that.
That's an incredible framework. And I love being able to walk through with that. If you don't mind, let's go through like a thought experiment so we can see like practical use, and I'll pull in from my client experience and the work that we do. And I kind of want to like be able to work through this with you. So let's say we sell, I don't want to say widgets, let's say we sell a service, right? And right now we're selling, let's say, a month-to-month service, and just to make it simple, let's say it's $500 a month, or if it's 2,000 or whatever you're selling right now if you're listening to this. But let's just say it's $275 for example's sake.
Okay.
Right. And you're doing the service and you're doing it online, et cetera, and you're positioning in, let's say, in the tech scene. Let's say based on the growth that you want to do, the team that you want to hire, the et cetera, you need to start raising prices to around $350. And then eventually your sweet spot is $750. So that's a big jump from $250 to $750 for your customers. So let's say we're doing the market research. How would we go through about testing and iterating price and knowing when the triggers are to start increasing price? I know some people would say, hey, just increase it and it is what it is and you'll just get new clients. And I don't think that's the most strategic approach. I think there has to be a phase to do that, to elevate so that you don't hurt the business, don't hurt the customer experience. But walking through this thought experiment with you, what would be some like high points that you'd look at?
Oh, this is a good one. You're putting my brain to the test today.
Welcome to the podcast.
I love it. Well, and I think, I really am going to go back to, you need to do your homework. So if you want to raise from 275 to 750, that's a massive price jump, which means you really need to be honest with yourself on, is the product going to create enough value and is it remarkable enough? Those two things for sure, to even warrant that price increase, because that's not an incremental price increase. That's a huge jump, which is okay.
I see that in the services though. That's why I'm bringing it up. Like not those exact price points, but I see that like when I'm in the weeds with clients and seeing in service-based industries. I know for B2C, that's way too dramatic, but it's true. You're right. That is a big jump. How do we add value, or how do we make ourselves more remarkable, right?
Yeah. So that would be where I would start, and then how you would validate those things is talk to your customers, interview, and actually ask, would you pay this much for this service? And they might say no. But then what's also important is to look at it through the lens of, is my current customer the right person to be going after for that 750 price point? So I bet when Dyson, man, you'd think I'd sell air wraps, but I don't. But I mean, I'm sure that Dyson didn't, look at, Conair that sells a $30 blow dryer and who's purchasing that and expect that end customer is going to buy the $700 blow dryer. So, you have to be willing to be real and say, yeah, who my customer is today is not who it needs to be tomorrow if I want to raise my price to that 750 jump. So then maybe it's going and interviewing some people that fit that other profile and seeing, would they be willing to pay the money for that? And if the answer is yes, then back to set the price and test with a small sample size. That's how I'd approach it. If you're not getting a lot of pushback, then it's probably safe to release that as the new product, but also understand you are going to get some pushback from those original customers who are no longer part of the target demographic. If you really, like those customers and you've built a good customer base, maybe you do something for them. Maybe you grandfather them at the old rate. Maybe you, allow them to stay at that rate for a certain period of time. It really depends on what makes sense for your business, but that's how I would approach looking at that big price jump and how do you make sure that you can actually do it.
Thank you for walking through with that. And I think it's important. And one of the things you mentioned to talk to your current customers and even, hey, we're going to protect you. You're locked in. Don't worry. But let's talk about potentially what would make it us better. And that can get, good feedback there, but also that you'd have to be talking to the right kind of customer. Like, hey, we identified that it's this industry or this type of customer or this are their psychographics and these are their goals and this is how they view themselves. Okay, out of our clients, which ones are actually those? Okay, it's these 5 or these 10 or these, if you're a CPG, like these 5,000, not sure, right? But being able to segment that way so that you're having intentional conversations as opposed to, oh, that one wasn't very helpful and we might have wasted their time.
Totally.
I love that. Well, Lisa, for our friends out there, I do have one final question before we go to the final, but I do want to switch gears a little bit. And I love the fact that, at the bottom, at the footer of your website, you're a certified women-owned business. Talk to us a little bit about that. We had some really amazing female entrepreneurs on the podcast. We'd love to know about your experience running this, being certified, and your goals and your mission.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking about that. To be honest, we only recently got our certification, but we've always been female owned and led.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting journey. There, VConnect International is who our certification is through, and there's a number of different governing bodies that offer that type of female owned cert. But it was an interesting process, and what I've actually found is they've been so supportive. They've put us in, contact with, larger brands with great supplier diversity programs. They offer lots of different like educational events. So and obviously the programming's online right now because of COVID, which is okay. But yeah, we've actually got a ton of value out of going through that process. And I have to admit that I was a little bit skeptical at the beginning when we looked at getting that certification, that I was like, oh, I don't know if this is really going to change much for us. There was there was a particular, and I can't unfortunately name them, but there was a particular very large brand. We were in discussion with their supplier diversity program, and it was kind of a requirement in order for us to get the deal. That's why we had originally gone through it. But what I found, so many people have commented on it and asked about it, and clients have kind of celebrated along with us, which I wasn't expecting. And so I'm pleasantly surprised that that's been the outcome. To your point though about, being a female owned business, I'd be lying if I didn't say that it has come with its challenges for sure. Not that I want to get all feminist on you.
No, I think it's important to be able to highlight that. I mean, we had amazing female entrepreneurs like Michelle Kwok and a few others, and not the top of my head, I would have to look at the list, and I can definitely make intros that way. But I know that there is different experiences coming up in the entrepreneurship world. My goal is to highlight, the things happening behind the scenes so that others can be aware of it and say, hey, let's support each other to grow.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think, every female entrepreneur out there would say, yeah, there's been challenges along the way, but, it is organizations like VConnect supporting us and celebrating, hey, we're female owned. It's a beautiful thing. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, Marcella Mandeville, who's the CEO at Alberta Women Entrepreneurs, before we had gotten our certification. And, one of her bigger gripes is that people often refer to, female owned businesses as, it's a special interest group. And it's like, no, actually, we contribute to the economy just as much as male led organizations do. Thank you. So yeah, I'm really proud to have our certification now. And I'm excited to see some of the doors that it helps us open for sure.
No, I love that. And being able to support each other, like minority owned businesses, veteran disabled owned businesses, and the whole gamut. And it's awesome, the work that you're doing. But for all of our listeners out there, Lisa, what's the best place that people can go to thank you for this episode and learn more about you?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm really active on LinkedIn. So that's probably the easiest way to reach out to me directly. Or check out our website, wearebottomline.com, just how that sounds. Lots of information there. And don't be afraid to reach out to me directly, Lisa@wearebottomline.com. Pop me an email.
I love it. I'll put those links in the show notes, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you.